Back again after a rather odd night last night. I'm really sorry, not only for the fact that I couldn't have been there with you, but also for all the audio difficulties that we had. I wasn't even aware what was happening because I could not hear. I had the sound off on both my other computers so that there would no be feedback. But evidently, it was causing a lot of havoc there in the studio. I've gone ahead, and after the session, I went and re-recorded the entire talk. And because George was not over my shoulder yelling at me to shut up and to shut down, I was able to go for an hour and 34 minutes with that talk on the Taliban. So that is now up on Fander Films. You can go see it there. If anybody else wants it, grab it, put it on your own sites. That's fine. But tonight now we're shifting gears. We're moving into textual criticism, and you've been hearing all about textual criticism today on the Bible, but mostly textual criticism on the Bible. We're now segueing over textual criticism of the Quran itself. And I listening to the panel last night, the four that were up there talking about some of the most difficult questions that were being thrust on us as Christians, and they responded to those difficult questions. And then the question was, well, what are some of the most difficult questions being posed to Muslims, which is polemics. And no one really talked about really what I consider probably the two most exciting, and actually three most exciting questions that are being posed to Muslims, possibly because none of the four on the panel were really involved in this new research. And it has to do with the book, The Man in the Place. The book, The Man in the Place. This is something that Muslims don't know how to deal with. They don't know how to do with the book. They don't know how to do when we confront their original manuscripts, when we confront also the whole evolution of the Quran, how it was put together. And they don't know how to confront the man Muhammad. They do not know what to do with him in the 7th century. And they also don't know how to confront or be confronted. They don't know how to deal with. They don't know how to answer the amazing questions that are coming up now against Mecca, the place, the book, the man, the place, the book, the Quran, the man, Muhammad, and the place, Mecca, all in the 7th century. None of that was brought up last night. And I said, goodness sakes, this is what has changed everything for me. I have never had it this easy. I have never had it this easy in polemics. Polemically speaking, we are in the driving seat, folks. We can pretty much hold Muslims accountable on almost every foundational area of their faith. And I've never seen in 40 years this kind of environment, these kinds of arguments. I have never seen what we now have at hand today. And one of them we're going to do tonight. Tomorrow night, we're going to do another one. And that would be the place, Mecca. But tonight, we're going to talk about the Qira'at. Qira'at. The Qira'at. Now, for most of you, those of you who are watching online, you probably don't even know what I'm talking about. That's okay. By the end of this talk, you will know everything about the Qira'at you need to know, because this is proving to be one of the holes in the narrative. Holes in narrative? Where does that come from? Hold on. We're going to get into that, because there it is. This is what I'm talking about. We're going to unpack this problem right here, this stack of books. Books, they should be one book, right? Those should be one Quran. Oh, they're Qurans, all right. They're Qurans, all right. But no two are alike. And that is what we're going to talk about tonight. And most of you probably don't even know that this exists, don't even know that these arguments are here, would not even know that this was a problem had it not been for one small woman, 5'2", whose name is Hatun. So I'm going to introduce her tonight, and I'm also going to introduce what she found. So let's get right into it, and let's open up the PowerPoint and start from there. Say, the Qira'at Quranic Conundrum. That's the title that I use. It is a real conundrum for Muslims. As you will see, it is a huge problem for Muslims, not just those on the street, but also those in academia. But let's get into it and find out why. Now, what do they claim about the Quran? And the claims are pretty well universal, whether they are radical over here on the right, whether they are nominal, maybe not the liberals so much, but certainly 99% of all Muslims in the world would make these claims. First of all, they would say the Quran is uncreated, that it has always existed. It exists on these clay tablets that are eternal. They would say that this is because of what the Quran itself claims for itself in chapter 85, verse 22. These preserved tablets, and every exegete would say that that is the eternality of the Quran. They would say that it was sent down between 610 and 632, that 22-year period, to a man named Muhammad, there living in first in Mecca and then Medina. And then they would say that it was completed by the time of Uthman, that it was written down in its final form, in its canonical form, in 652, roughly about 20 years after Muhammad died, and that it has been perfectly preserved for the last 1,400 years. Which means the Quran has had no human interference. That's what's important. Perfectly preserved means it has had no word, no letter, nothing that has changed in the last 1,400 years. And they have to say that. Why? Well, how can it be uncreated if it can be manipulated by man? How can it be perfectly preserved if it can be manipulated by man? How can it be complete and sent down in its final form if it was manipulated by man? You can see that would be a contradiction. This is my iced tea. I've got a bad cough because of the sickness I'm having. So I've got to keep choking up. Now, the same question may be asked of Christians. Do we make these claims about the Bible? And no, we do not. The Bible was created. It was written by man. We know who wrote it. We even put the names on most of the books they wrote. It was not sent down to just anyone. It was written on earth by men living on earth, inspired by God. We would admit that. And the Bible was complete. We would agree with that context, that it was complete in its original form, but that there has been changes. It is not perfectly preserved. We know where the changes are in the last 2,000 years. We know when they happened, who probably did it, and we know where they happened, and we're totally transparent about it. So we would never make those 4 claims. And of course, then the 5th claims, we know that it has had human interference. Of course it has, because it's written by men. Therefore, it's written by men. Then it is open to copyist errors, and we talk about that. We bring that up in almost all of our talks. I don't know why Muslims get all up over head over heels, or that's because we would not make the claims Muslims make. Since we don't make the same claims they make about their revelation, we therefore do not have to defend what Muslims have to defend. So this is not an argument for the Bible. This is solely an argument tonight against the Quran. Tonight, I'm not going to sit there and try to confront uncreated or sent down. That happened 1,400 years ago. Uncreated, how can I even begin to confront that? As far as the idea of its completeness, however, or its unchangeability, or the fact that it's perfectly preserved and that there's been no human interference, at those areas I can confront. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. Thus, what we need to find is one Quranic manuscript. That means an entire manuscript, 114 surahs, dated from the 7th century and the mid-7th century, not the late 7th century, but the mid-7th century, 652, because that's the claim they made, and complete, not just a little bit here, a little bit there, one fragment here, one fragment there. I want all 114 surahs, and it is perfectly preserved. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll quote them. They are the ones that claim that there's not one letter, not one word change in 1,400 years. We're going to show that, and you're going to see what I mean. So I'm going to look at 8 areas. The first one we're going to look at is what the modern Muslim leaders claim. I'm then going to look at what did the Muslim scholars say, see if there's a disconnect between them. And then we're going to go right into the beginnings of this whole Qira'at conundrum. Where did it all begin? Who was the one that really got the drum going and how it caused so much havoc around the world? And then we're going to move into the holes in the standard narrative interview, that infamous interview that happened a little over a year ago. We're going to define what the Qira'ats are, and then we're going to look at the more than 30 official rawis or Qira'at rawis that do exist today. We're going to take a quick look at some of the variants just to show what we're talking about. And then we're going to ask about the one that was chosen, the Hafs canonized text, the one that we have today that everybody's supposed to use. Why was it chosen, and where was it chosen, and by whom? So let's start with what do modern Muslim leaders claim. Fethullah Gulen, one Quran, he says, unaltered, unedited, and untampered. Well, that's a pretty big claim right there. He is one of the religious leaders there in Turkey. Suzan Hanif, who is a convert to Islam, maybe she doesn't know too much, but she said it's been preserved today in its exact original form. Here you have Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He should know what he's talking about because he is the one that actually did the translation, the best translation into the English text in the 1930s. And he says not a single letter has changed. So that's the claim he makes. There's the first one. Not a single letter has changed in 1,400 years. Malvi Muhammad Ali, who is from the Ahmadiyya group. And he says not even a diacritical point has changed, not even a dot above or below the letter, not one dot. That's even much more than what Ali says. Oh, here's Dr. Shabir Ali. He's a scholar. Many of you know him. Anthony, you've been debating him in the last few weeks. And he says that in the last 1,300 years, we can compare that which is in the British Museum and also other copies of the Quran. And we find that when we read them today, we find them to be exactly identical. He goes on and says that Muslims have never quarreled over what is in the text. In over 1,400 years, before he said 13, now he says 1,400, looking at the Tashkent, the Samarkand in Uzbekistan, there in Tashkent, and you look at that which we have in all the other manuscripts, he says we find no difference from that copy to what we're reading today. No difference. So the claims they make are not my claims. These are their claims. These are modern scholars. These are well-known figures. Dr. Yasser Qadi, probably considered to be the world's leading authority on the Quran here in the Western world, says not a word, not a letter has changed. There hasn't even been two copies of the Quran that are different, even one letter or one word. The Quran is the most protected of all scriptures, he says, and God has protected his Quran from any kind of alteration, deviation, miswriting. All Qurans, even up to our time, he continues, conform letter for letter, word for word, with the Uthman Mus'haf. That's the first one in 652. So that to this day, there is no different version of the Quran. There is but one Quran. Oh, if you get him to say that, you have to believe it, because he is the world authority, living in Houston, speaks excellent English and also Urdu and also Arabic. So why do they make these claims? Well, they have to. They have no other choice. It's because of the book itself. The Quran itself makes these claims. In chapter 85 that I mentioned earlier, in verse 21 and 22, it says, this is a glorious Quran inscribed in the preserved tablets. In chapter 10, verse 15, bring us a Quran other than this or change it. Say, it is not for me to change it on my own accord. So no man, no human can change it, according to 10:15. Repeated similarly in chapter 18, verse 27, and recite what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord. None can change his words. There it is, in black and white. Then we have the reason it cannot be changed is in chapter 15, verse 9. Verily we, that's God referring to himself, it is we who have sent down the Quran, and surely we will guard it. So that's Allah himself who will not let one letter, one word change. And therefore, you cannot go against God's own guarding. That's why it's so clear that they have to make these claims. Now, the conclusion is, they all agree that the Quran we have today has not changed one iota since its inception 1,400 years ago, because the Quran says Allah will guard it. That the Quran we have today is exactly the same as that which is on the preserved tablets in heaven. Every word and every letter is the same, and that the Quran has had absolutely no human interference since its inception. But that's what they claim today. What about the earliest Muslim scholars? What did they believe? Let's look and see what they said, because you're going to see there's a disconnect here. No, let's go ahead and let's see what they do say. Let's start with our good friend, Ibn Abi Dawud. And he says some verses were lost. Here you have As-Suyuti. He says some verses disappeared. Sahih Muslim, second only to Al-Bukhari in importance. He says some verses were forgotten. Sahih Bukhari says that some verses were canceled. I'll let you read it on your own. I have to really get through this because I only have 40 minutes. So let me try to get through these as quick as I can. And then you have Sahih Bukhari then is going talking about the verse on Rajam, the verse on stoning. That is now missing. And you have Umar, who's all upset about this and say, what are we going to do? Because we stoned and the prophet himself stoned. What are they going to do when they look at the Quran in chapter 24, verse 2, and they find now it's been changed to 100 lashes. Some verses were overlooked, according to Ibn Abi Dawud. Other verses were changed, according to Muwatta ibn Malik. And then you have some verses were modified, according to Ibn Abi Dawud again. Sahih Bukhari comes back and says that other verses were substituted. And then you have Sunan ibn Majah, who says that there's a verse of stoning, and this is Aisha speaking, of breastfeeding an adult 10 times were revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow, Aisha is saying, and when the messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and the tame sheep came in and ate it. Fortunately for her, so she doesn't have to do that anymore. But this means that even sheep can eat the word of God. So let's take a look and summarize this. Lost, disappeared, forgotten, canceled, missing, overlooked, changed, modified, substituted, eaten by sheep. Folks, what does this tell you? Does this sound like a book which was compiled perfectly and completely, word for word, letter for letter? Does this not imply intentional human intervention right through its initial compilation, at least for those in the 9th and 10th century, where are we getting all these quotes from? Is there not a disconnect between the earliest scholars from the 9th and 10th century and what modern scholars are saying today? If the Quran is eternal and from heaven, then it should have come down complete and need no changes, not one word, not even one letter. So what has happened recently, which has created the havoc concerning the perfect preservation of the Quran? Well, this is the Qira'at conundrum, and now we need to get into it, and now we need to introduce the hero of the day, or the heroine of the day, and her name is Hatun. She should be at this conference. She was to have been here. I hope that we can still get her zoomed in, because credit needs to go to her, and she should be doing this talk. This is her talk. This is her material. This is really, she is the one that needs to be given credit for it. But let me introduce her. There's Hatun there. You have many who have seen it. She is a daughter of an imam from Turkey, and she just will not shut up. She was on my team when I was there from 2013 to 2017. For the last 3 years of my time in Britain at Speaker's Corner, for 3 years, she would be right next to me on the ladder, taking on the Muslims. And it was amazing to see what she could do even back then. And she has taken over my ministry at Speaker's Corner and has just gone from strength to strength to strength to strength. You cannot shut this woman up. And in an interview she just did a few weeks ago after she was stabbed there, you can see the stabbing and the blood, where she's preaching the gospel after getting up from it because of that the Quran she's holding in her hands. Those holes are very significant. You're going to see why she has drilled holes into that Quran. Please don't any of you drill holes into any Qurans. Let Hatun do it. She can do it. She can take the blame for it. And as you can see, she can even get up and keep going. But because of what she has done in the last 4 years, when asked in an interview just a few weeks ago, how many Muslims has she won to Christ through basically exposing the Quran like this? She says over 1,000 Muslims she has brought to Jesus Christ. And 17 imams have now left Islam, have become Christians, all because of that 5'2" woman and because of this material. This is why I'm saying, folks, we've got to learn this material. You've got to learn this material. Look how much profit Hatun is getting. And she's doing this in Britain, not in Turkey, in a second language. Now, she does get beat up and she does pay for it because she does have a very unique personality. I will admit, I worked with her for 4 years. I know what she's like, actually 5 years. So I know her well. I'm still working with her. But there is something happening in the world because of this woman. And it all has to do with what she found. Now, this is what she found. Let me just name them as we put up. I'll try to do them as quick as I can. She found Al-Susi's Quran. Then she found Ibn Ja'far's Quran. Then Yaqub's Quran. Duri Abi Mamar's Quran. Then Ibn Amir's Quran. Then she found Khalaf al-Ashar's Quran and Al-Daif Ibn Khalad's Quran. And then she found Watch, the Al-Azraq way. She found another Watch, the Al-Bahani way. And then she found Ibn Jamaz's Quran. Duri Quran. There's another one. And Khalaf again. What are we going? What's happening? I hold on a minute. Stop. You're going too fast. Shoba, another name. And then she found Al-Isana. And then you have the Hisham's Quran. And then you have Al-Bazi's Quran. And Khalaf once again. Another Khalaf, a Shoba, another Shoba. And then you have the Imam's Quran. And then she found the Khalun's Quran. And there, Ibn Kathir's Quran. Not the Exegete. This is another one. Another Warsh. Look at that. And the Raf Quran. And then a Shoba Quran. And then she ends with the Khalud Quran. Take a look at these. 26 different Qurans that she had collected from places like Yemen and Jordan and places like Morocco, where she had started the collection. And these we decided to take to Speaker's Corner in 2016. Listen, we've been told all the time, all our lives, I've been told, and all her life, she's been told that there's only one Quran. And that's what you have all been told. Well, here were 26 different Qurans, 26 different Qurans. So we took them down to Speaker's Corner. And this is what happened. There is only one Quran, right? And that every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie. You run away from truth. Okay, so there are 2 Qurans today, right? 2.
More than 2 Qurans.
More than 2, 3 Qurans?
More than 3 Qurans.
More than 3, 4 Qurans?
There are approximately 26 of the Qurans.
26 different Qurans.
difference. Look and see which has the Fatta and which has the Dhamma. The difference is between Fatta and Dhamma. Read it. Read it again.
حتى يقول حتى يقول
Read it again. The prophets fought, but by the time you get to the point, they were killed. That is a huge
Attention. Don't give up.
Your faces, Muslim people, your face from here. Come.
You better go. We're going to make it more and more difficult for you.
Okay, let me just unpack what you just saw there. That happened way back in 2016. We held up Hatun's 26th Quran there in June of that year. First time that had ever been done, I think, anywhere in the world. I don't think anybody had ever done that before. Well, you can see why. Because look at the reaction of the Muslims. They tried to pull the examples we were showing, text with text, different examples of verse after verse after verse. We had about 70 different verses there that we were showing. They grabbed them. Fortunately, they're cellophane, so they didn't tear. And then over on the right, see that man there? That's Muhammad Hijab. He was in the crowd. You all know who Muhammad Hijab if you've been watching the internet. He was there filming me. And then he goes over to the side. You saw him over to the right, telling all the Muslims to come to him, to leave our ladder. Don't look at what they're showing you, he said. Don't listen to what they're saying. Motion them not to listen, not to look. Obviously, he wanted to tell them what was going on. And he must have, right? You would think. We now know he had nothing to tell them. He had not seen this himself. He didn't know anything about this. And this was the first time he had seen these different Qurans. He didn't know how to engage us at all. Could it be that he was going through a crisis of faith on that day? I don't know. There's no way, because I've not talked to him about it. This is why this is such a problem. Let's look at this graph. The Quran's beginning. Muhammad dies in 632. We all know that, according to the standard Islamic tradition, or standard Islamic narrative, as we're calling it. We begin with one Quran at the time he dies. That's what we're told, right? But then Jibril gives him 7 different readings. So now there are 7, actually 6 different ones above and beyond the one that he is revealed. So now there are 7 different readings, or 7 different Qurans. Now, back to 7 Qurans now. Not 1, but 7 by the time he dies in 632. Uthman then comes and finds that there's a real problem with it. And so he eradicates and destroys all the other Qurans and brings it back down to just one, the Qurayshi Quran, right? So we now have only one. So where did the 30 Qira'at Qurans come from that we now have today? You notice it's not no longer 26, it's now 30. Why has it become such an issue today? Well, here are the 30 official Qurans. I'm showing you that. Now, this is not, I didn't put this graph together. This you can get up on Wikipedia. These are the official readers, which would be the Qira'ats, and the transmitters, which would be Rawis. So look on the left there. You have 7 green ones. Those are the first 7. And then you have 14 purple ones, and those are the students of the first 7. First green ones are chosen by Ibn Mujahid. The next 14 are chosen by Al-Shatibi. And then you have the 3 red ones. Those are 3 more Qira'ats that were added by Al-Jazari. And then he added another 6 students to those 3. So look at the ones on the left, the ones in green and red. Those are the 10. Those are the ones that Muslims always talk about, the initial 10. But those initial 10 are not at the time of Muhammad. Take a look at the dates. Notice the dates. I put the dates there. No one else wants to put dates in. I put the dates of every one of these individuals when they died. I want you to look at when they died, but also look at when they lived. Because the readers, if you notice, not any of them lived at the time of Muhammad. And when they did their work was all in the next century, in the 8th century. The earliest is Ibn Amir, and his death date is 736. That's well over 100 years after Muhammad. So he never knew Muhammad, and he never even lived in the same, or he lived in the same century, but he didn't do his work in the same century. And none of these, they start from 736, the first 7, and they go all the way up to 805. That's the 9th century. In fact, that man, Al-Qasai, he was born 100 years after Muhammad. So those are the first 7. But then look at 3 below that. That makes up the 10. There's 748, 821, and 844. Oh, I could unpack this for hours, but I'm not going to. I just want you to look at that to remember, because when the Muslims tell you of the great 7 and the great 10, those are the ones on the left. But let's hold on. Let me just show a little bit more of what we're talking about. So here are the readers: Nafi from Medina, Ibn Kathir from Al-Maki, Mecca. That means Abu Amr from Basra, Ibn Amir from Damascus, Asim from Kufa, Hamza from Kufa, and Al-Hisai from Kufa, chosen by Ibn Mujahid in 936. Notice they are not chosen until the 10th century, though they were all writing in the 8th and the 9th century. They don't get chosen until the 10th century. Significant, because that's 300 years after Muhammad. And then the transmitters, the Rawis, they don't get chosen until the 12th century, the end of the 12th century. That's 600 years later. And there you can see all their names, 14 of them, to support the first 7. And then you have these 3 and then the 6, which are all chosen by Al-Jazari in 1429. That is 800 years after Muhammad. So the 30 official Qur'ans that we have today are chosen 800 years. Totally, in other words, they are finalized, canonized 800 years after Muhammad. Now, that's the guy we want to look at. Notice he's not part of the initial 7, nor is he part of the creme de la creme, the best of the best 10 that Yasar Qadi always talks about. He is way over in the blue, the purple section, and he is for 144 years after Muhammad that he dies. Look at them and notice that there are, if you look at them and unpack them and just look at their books, there are over 93,000 differences. Now, here's Bernie Powers, a good friend of mine in Australia. Those are the ones he's collected. He's got 23 of them. Hatun has currently 37 of them. I have got just 9 right here that I just bought off the internet, and you can buy these as well. They're quite easy. I got these from Illinois here in the United States. Now let's jump 4 years later. Let's jump to last year, to 2020, June 8th of 2020. And let's go to the interview, the infamous interview, Holes in the Standard Narrative interview, it's being called, between that same man, Muhammad Hijab. Remember, he was there in 2016. He was seeing for the first time these 26 different Qur'ans. So 4 years later, he comes and he wants to talk to Dr. Yasar Qadi, the world authority on the Quran. There he is back in Speaker's Corner. There's Muhammad Hijab there in 2016. So he was there, seeing it for the first time, going through what I think was a crisis of faith. 4 years later, he then asked this man on the right. So that's Muhammad Hijab, a little bit plumper than he was 4 years earlier. And that's Yasar Qadi. He's in Houston. Muhammad Hijab is in London. And they have an hour and 45-minute interview, but it's the last 28 minutes where all the damage was done. So what was asked? What was happening? Well, I watched it, and many of you have watched it, and you saw what happened. Immediately, he asked this question. I'm going to put my hand out there, and I'm going to have a blank sheet of paper. Which Quran are you going to write on it? Which one are you going to write down, Dr. Qadi? We now have 30 different ones. Hatun showed 26 at Speaker's Corner. Which one is the one that's in heaven? Which one is the eternal one? Which one is the one that came to Muhammad? Which one was the one that was written down by Uthman in 652? And which is that Qurayshi dialect of which all the others were destroyed? Which is the one that was retained? Before he could even ask his question, Yasar Qadi says, do not ask this question. We do not talk about this in public. And certainly not on camera. You can ask me this later, but not now, not here, and not with that camera on. He talked about, and then Yasar Qadi went on and said that this problem known as ahruf in Qira'at has been the greatest problem for Muslim scholars in the last 1,000 years. And then many of the Western students, advanced students now and that only advanced students does he allow to take the deep dive to join his class and learn about it. Obviously, Muhammad Hijab is not an advanced student, so he's been left outside. He went on to say that we in Islam have a respect for our revelation. We have a respect for our Quran, he says. We put a red line, and we don't go beyond that red line. We don't allow other people to go beyond that red line. The problem is he's living in the West. And the West has come leaps and bounds. And when he went to Yale University back there in 1995, he suddenly realized there were no red lines there. And suddenly he realized that people were asking all kinds of questions. And that's when he gave his famous quote. He turned towards Muhammad Hijab and he says, you in the East, you have holes in the classic narrative. Holes in the classic narrative. Finally, after 25 minutes, Muhammad Hijab asked one last time, please, which Quran are you going to write here? Which is the one you're going to put there? And Yasir Qadhi's responds with, they're all the Quran. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. You mix them around and you get, wait, hold on a minute. 93,000 differences in those Qurans, folks, that we have found. Now, other things that I remember him quoting, he said that this is the most difficult topic for scholars. We don't tell converts about this. We wait till they are much more advanced before we get into this subject. And only the most advanced do we let them have that deep dive. And Western scholars, he went on to say, are looking at us now with like emperor with no clothes. And then he interestingly made a huge admission. He says in the last 25 years, since he did his doctorate there at Yale University on this very subject, in the last 25 years, I have never done a lecture on this, and I never will. And he said, don't ask me what was written in the blank Muslim. He just didn't want to talk about it. When he was finally, push came to shove, he finally said, they are all the Quran. Within 2 weeks, they had to take down all the comments from both their sites because there were so many Muslims leaving Islam, so many Muslims blaming them and putting the blood of their guilt on their shoulders. Within 2 months, they had to completely delete that interview from both of their channels. You will not find it on their channels anymore. That's how damaging that interview is. That's how damaging these Qira'at are. And that's how damaging what Hatun has found is against the preservation of the Quran. Let's define what we're talking about. So what do we mean? Well, to understand what we're talking about, we need to do a little bit of historical overview. The Arabic language, which is used in the Quran today, does not come from the Hijaz to begin with. It comes from much further north. It's the Nabatean, way up near Petra. Surprise, surprise. But in that text, in the script, in the textual, the text that was used there in the 7th century Nabatean Aramaic, they only had 16 consonants, known as razam. Now, this is a problem because you couldn't know what you were reading. There were so many different variations that you could put to every one of those letters that they had a difficulty that needed to be resolved. And so what they did is they started adding what they called dots or ijam, and then vowels or haraka. This was done in the late 7th century and into the 8th century. So by the 8th century, then they had not just 16 letters, they now had 28 letters, which we have now in the present Arabic today. But here's the problem. Depending on how many dots you put in, and there's up to 5 dots, and how many vowels, you can pronounce it many different ways, depending on what you have. So let's just take a look and see what we're talking about. So here you have a script that has no dots and no vowels. This is the Samarkand manuscript on the left, and there's the Sana'a manuscript on the right, both from the 8th century. No dots, no vowels. How do you read? A Muslim looking at that or an Arabist looking at that would not know how to read that because it could be all kinds of letters. Excuse me. Here are the 28 letters that are used today. Now, amongst those 28 letters, the Aleph, the Kaf, the Lam, the Mim, the Ha, and the Waw, those 6 do not require any dots. Those are unique letters. The other 22 all need dots. And you see, they all either need dots or don't need dots to have the same derivation. So 22 of the 28 letters do need dots, all of which were invented or created in the latter 7th and the early 8th century. Here I'm going to give you an example. So if you just take one little bold shape, which most letters start with, and you put 1 dot above, it's a nun or the N sound that we would have in English. 2 dots above it would be a ta or the T sound that we have in English. 3 dots above it would be the tha or the TH sound that we have in English. 1 dot below it without the other 3, and you have a ba or the B sound that we have in English. 2 dots below it without the 3 that are at top, and you have the ya or the Y sound. So you can see 5 different dots give you 5 different letters. And that's the problem, because obviously you can start adding those dots. Well, hold on a minute. What about the vowels? Because there are 3 vowels that didn't exist in the 7th century either. The first is the kasra, which is the E sound. And then you have the dama, which is the U sound, that little curlicue above the letter. And there you have the fatha, which is the A. That's a BBB that you see in front of you. So you have 3 vowels and 5 dots. You imagine that. With a smiley face, given the vowels and the dots that you have, you can get 19 different words, depending on where you put the dots and where you put the vowels. Al-Fadi, my good colleague and friend, he says you can get up to 33 different words using the dots and vowels. And here's the dilemma. If from these 16 letters, you now have 28 letters, to choose from, and an additional 3 vowels for every letter. There are so many different possibilities of words to create. With no overarching authority until the 10th century, anyone who could write began to and make their own choices. Once they wrote down their derivations of what they thought the text said, they wrote their names on their books, and the first 7 of whom were known as the Qira'at, or readings, chosen by Ibn Mujahid in 936, 300 years after Muhammad. They then took on students who wrote their own derivations of what they thought the Quran said, and another 14 of these students, known as Rahwis, were added in 1194 AD by Al-Jazari, 560 years after Muhammad. Then in 1429 AD, almost 800 years after Muhammad, the final collection of an additional 3 readings and 6 more riwayat, or rawis, were added, so that there were now a total of 30 official readings of the Quran, and the majority, 22 of them, living in Kufa, in Iraq, not nowhere near Mecca or Medina. Let's look at a graph. And here you can see it. Muhammad dies in 632. The Uthman's Qurayshi Quran comes in 650. You start getting the 7 readings: Nafi, Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, Ibn Amir, Asim. You have Hamza, and then you have Qasai, all by Ibn Mujahid. Then you get the next 3 readers. That's Abu Jafar, Yaqub, and also Khalaf. That was by Al-Jazari. 10 official Qurans. Now look at after Abdul Malik. Look where they come. From 692, you can see they don't precede Abdul Malik. They come after Abdul Malik. Hugely important, because it's Abdul Malik that we're claiming that really introduces what we now know today as Islam. But hold on a minute. Then you have also the students, and here are all the students. Look at all of them. I'm not going to name them. There's so many of them, but there are a good 21 of them. In that group, you have then the canonical one, the Hafs, who died in 796, and the Warish at the very top, who's the second. These are the 2 most popular of the riwayats, or of the Qira'ats in the world today. 30 official Qurans by the end of the 15th century, all coming after Abdul Malik. Here is what Hatun has done. She's put them out and she's showing you some of the difference. You can see the tens of thousands, some of them 5,000 differences just between them and the one that she circled there in black, which is the Hafs one. So you can see that this caused all kinds of problems. Now, when you look at these, I'm just going to put them up on a graph again, but I want to show you also, take a look at what we now know as the traditional writers. Remember, we've talked about this, and we'll say more about this tomorrow. Ibn Hisham dies in 833, and you then have Al-Waqidi, thus the Sirah. Then you have Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, you have Al-Tabari, and them, and they all come in the blue. Those are all the Islamic traditions, the standard Islamic narrative. They come after these Qira'ats. So these Qira'ats are all introduced, but they don't get chosen until after Al-Tabari, because Ibn Mujahid comes even after Al-Tabari. So when they get chosen from the 10th and the 12th and the 15th century. So even after the standard Islamic narrative, you still don't have the Qira'ats that are in place. You only have the references to them. 44 years after Abdul Malik for the first one that comes out. And of course, when you look at the traditions, they're 140 years after Abdul Malik for the beginning of the traditions. Now, are they the only ones? Are there only just 30? No. According to our good friend Shadi Nasser, who has probably done the best work on this, Shadi Hikmat Nasser, he found out that between the time of the initial 8th century, Ibn Amir and Damas that I showed you earlier, created his Quran, and the 10th century when he was chosen by Ibn Mujahid, the intervening 200 years, in those 200 years, there were many other transmitters known as the Rawis. In fact, so many that it became a crisis facing Al-Jazari in the 12th century, and the 2, to which he appointed 2 transmitters for each of the 7. So how many does Nasser estimate there could have been? Well, he just looked at 4 of the Qira'ats and the students that came after him. And when Ibn Mujahid was going to choose which students were for each one of these 4, look what he found. When he just looked at 4 of the Qira'ats between Ibn Kathir and Ibn Mujahid, Ibn Mujahid had 59 he could have chosen from. He only chose 2 out of those 59. From Nafi up to Ibn Mujahid, that is from 785 up to 936, there were 63 that he could have chosen from. He only chose 2 from those 63. When it came to Abu Amr and his students that came after him, he had 65 to choose from. He only chose 2 and threw out the other 63. When it came between Asim and Muhajirin, and this is where Hafs comes in because he is from Asim. There were 91 that he could have chosen. He threw out 89 and just retained 2. So when you add that up, that's a total of 278 just from those 4 schools, those 4 Qira'ats. There were 278 other Qur'ans. That's just with 4 of them. If you look at the 10, of which all the students came from, the original 10, that would be an average of 4. If you average them out, an average of 70. For the 10, that would be around 700 different written Qira'at Qur'ans that existed by the end of the 15th century. By 1429, there could have been as many as 700 different Qur'ans. I only have 9 here. And we have been able to find, Hatun has been able to find 37, and already her team there in London has found 93,000 differences. With 700 to look at, but they've all been destroyed, they've all been lost, so we can't. But can you see, we're not talking about one Quran anymore. We're talking about hundreds of Qurans. Now, let's just take a look at some quick variants. And we'll be doing this. I don't want to do this too long because this is what I'll be doing with Al-Fadi and I. We'll be doing a lot of this. When you look at Surah 3, Ayah 146, on the left you have Qatala. He fought. That's the Hafs. In the Warsh, it says Qutila. He was killed. So were these prophets, did they fight or were they killed? Well, if I was a prophet, I would like to simply fight rather than be killed. And you can see, because one I survive, the other I die. So that makes a big difference to the prophet as to whether or not you have the right word there. Here is in chapter 43, verse 19. Ibadu, slaves on the left, and Rao, you have Inda. Completely 2 different words, seemingly. One says, the Badu says, and they make the angels who are slaves of the beneficent females. On the Rao, it says, and they make angels who are in the presence. So one are slaves, the others are just simply in the presence. So are the angels slaves of Allah or simply in the presence of Allah? Is it the slaves or those in Allah's presence who will be made females? If I were an angel, I would prefer being in God's presence than his slave. And if I were an angel being a male myself, I would prefer being a male rather than a female, thank you. So you can see this does change the meaning. Does it change the practice? Not necessarily. But this does here. In chapter 46, verse 15, here you have on the Hafs on this left, which is the standard narrative or the one that's canonical, Ishanan, which means doing good. Al-Duris has it as Husdan, which means beauty. And we have enjoined on man doing good to his parents, or in course, Al-Duri, it's we have enjoined on man beauty to his parents. So are men supposed to do good or be beautiful to their parents? Well, I'm a parent. I have 3 boys, and I would prefer that my sons are good rather than just be good looking. Here, 98 verse 6, chapter 98, verse 6, you have Bariati versus Bariati. One is abiding eternity therein. Those are the worst of creatures. It's talking about us, the people of the scripture. We're the polytheists. Are we in hell because we are the worst of creatures, according to Hafs? Or are we in hell because we are the worst of the innocent? Hold on a minute. This has a huge ramifications for me as a Christian. Are we Christians the worst creatures, or are we innocent? What are innocent Christians, Jews, and polytheists doing in hell to begin with? So you can see, as you unpack these are just 4 of 93,000 we have found. You can see how the damage this does just by changing the talk, changing the vowels, changing the letter, which changes the word. When you change the word, then you change the meaning. When you change the meaning, you change the doctrine. You change the doctrine, you change the practice. So how in the world was the Hafs, the one that became the canonical text, how was it chosen? 1924, they had a trial crisis because you had 30 different Qurans, and they were having there in Cairo, just the city of Cairo, they were having tests. Standardized tests. And with standardized tests, you got to have standardized answers, but they weren't. They were getting 30 different answers. And so they had a dilemma on their hand. They needed to find one Quran so that all the answers would be the same. And so they went to and asked Muhammad bin Ali al-Husaini al-Haddad, who was there at Al-Azhar University, the primary university in the Muslim world, there in 1924. They went to him and asked him to choose one of the 30, just one. And he chose the Hafs. Hafs, who was from Kufa in Iraq, not from anywhere in Mecca, not from Mecca or Medina. He was way up in the east, hundreds of miles away, and he died in 796. His Quran is right here. This is his Quran. This Quran right here. And this is the one he chose. He wrote this Quran 144 years after Muhammad died. And yet this is the one he chose. They took all the other Qurans and they dumped them into the Nile, thinking that would get rid of them. Little did they know that you can still buy them today, as I have just done right here. Hatun has been able to find 37 of them, even more than the 30. Bernie has found 23 of them. If you look at the Hafs alone, Hatun has found 7 different Hafs, because between 1924, there were then corrections made and other corrections made. So they then had to create a standardized text for all of Egypt in 1936. So in 1936, they then made the standardized text that had been corrected 7 different times between 1924 and 36 in that intervening 12 years. And that one then became the text for all of Egypt so they could have standardized testing in all of Egypt. That was 85 years ago, folks. That was known as the Farouk edition, named after King Farouk, who came to power that year. Now, over there in Saudi Arabia, they saw what was happening in Egypt and they got jealous and they said, hold on a minute, if they can do that there in Egypt, why can't we do that all over the world? And so King Fahd, who came to power in 1982, he then commissioned and said, we want to make sure that the Hafs copy is the text that is used all over the world for all the schools. And that was that in 1985. That's just 36 years. Folks, if you were living in 1985, you are older than the Quran. You are older than the Hafs. You are older than the standardized text. That must make you feel old. So let's come to conclusions, because I see I've now gone over my 40 minutes. When all is said and done, what have we concluded? We now know that what modern Muslim scholars claim is not what early Muslim scholars believed. Holding up the 26 Qira'at Qur'ans there at Speaker's Corner in 2016 opened up a whole can of worms for Muslim scholars and also for Muslim pundits, and as we now know, for those on the internet. In the interview that happened 4 years later on June 8, 2020, that created a platform for us to go public with the Qira'at narrative. And that's why we have jumped on this. And for the last year, we have been putting up video after video after video, and we're seeing not just tens, we're seeing hundreds of Muslims leaving Islam because of that interview. The 30 different official Arabic Qur'ans prove that for over 1,000 years, there have been a variety of Qur'ans, that not one of them is the same. And we have already counted 93,000 differences. Throwing 29 of them into the Nile way back in 1924 did not get rid of them all. And in fact, it has not solved the problem whatsoever. We can still use this material today to disprove categorically that the Quran has not been preserved. This argument hits at the very foundations of the Quran and also of Islam. Thank you for joining us. Let me stop sharing screen. I'll end this session. Now, can you see why this is so important, folks? You're probably going to ask, well, how can I use it? This is what I would suggest. Don't get all 9 of these Qurans. All you need are 2. Just get these 2. This is the Hafs. This is the Warsh. That's all you need. The Hafs is the official text. This is the one that was chosen in 1924 as the official text. Then it was chosen for Egypt in 1936, and then it was chosen for the whole world in 1985, 36 years ago. This one, however, is from Cairo in Egypt. Warsh. Warsh lived in Cairo in Egypt. He died in 812. He died in 796. So neither of them knew Muhammad at all. They didn't even come from the same century. You can see that there's a problem. 144 years after Muhammad, this one here. And so when you just look at these 2, this is used by and memorized by about 95% of the world's population. This is memorized by all those in North Africa. That's about 3% of the Muslim world's population. When you just compare these 2 texts, there are 5,000 different letters, 5,000 different words, 5,000 different meanings, different beliefs, different practices, you name it, we've got it. You can see why this is a problem. This is why Muslims do not want to debate you on this. They don't want you to talk about it. They would rather you just curled up and go home, because that is why then Hatun got stabbed, because she dared to then drill those holes in her Quran, saying, you have holes in your narrative, quoting Dr. Yusuf Qadi. And you can see how she had to be protected by those police. You can see the picture that I put up. She had to be protected by the police because they wanted to kill her. And finally, a little over a month ago, one man almost did kill her. I don't know how she survived. Oh, I do know how she survived. She's got Harry Larry up in the branches and Barry on the ground. She has 3 angels that are protecting her, the same 3 that protected me when I was at Speaker's Corner. God's going to continue to protect her. But folks, this is a discussion that you can have immediately. All you need is to say one simple thing. Whenever a Muslim says that the Quran has been preserved eternally, guarded by God, that not one letter, not one word can change. All you need to say is prove it. Look what we've got here. I've got 9. You can get your own collection, but all you really need are these 2. 5,000 differences just between these 2. That destroys the Quran, and it destroys any notion that this comes from God. Because if it has been changed, if it has men's names on it, if it has tens of thousands of differences between it, folks, that tells me that God has not guarded his word, is not capable of guarding his word. And that means there is no eternal Quran. That means there was no Quran sent to Muhammad. And that means Uthman had nothing to do with that book. It is riddled with human error. And it makes my job and your job that much easier. God bless you. It's been great being with you here. I'm almost 3,000 miles away on the other direction here on the East Coast. I'll see you all tomorrow, because now we've destroyed the Quran. Tomorrow, we're going to destroy Mecca. One of my favorite topics. We'll see you then. This is Jay. Over and out.